Today I'm going to show you some of the high gain patches which I created with the Fractal Audio FM9 Turbo. Today it's time again to look at the brand new Fractal Audio FM9 Turbo kick-ass modeling floor unit. Please check out my videos about that unit. It's basically the floorboard version of the XFX3, and I was creating some or playing around with some of the high gain amp models which I personally like in the XFX3, and created the patches in the FM9. And today I would like to show you 3 of them or 4 of them, I don't know. So open up the editor for you here, and currently I'm in the patch where I am using the Recto 2 Orange Vintage amp. But first of all, let me briefly explain you my effects chain. So here we have in the upper row the effects which I'm using in front of the amp. They're currently disengaged, but as you can see, these are the usual components here: the wah, phaser, compressor, pitch, which I'm using for the whammy effect with an expression pedal. And then it goes to the return here, and then into the amp at the cap, where we will have a closer look at in a second. And after the amp, I'm using the enhancer for this wide stereo effect here. You have to set it to the classic type for that, and spread it quite wide. Play around with that. It depends on how far your speakers are placed from each other, so you will get, can hear the phasing very nicely. And a long dark reverb using the music hall, but usually I'm cutting the highs here very drastically, like these dark reverbs. Multibond compression is just compressing the mids here in between 90 Hz and 350 Hz when chugging. At least it should. Yeah, as you can see, when I'm playing higher notes, it doesn't do anything. Please check out my video about that. I was explaining that a million times. The delay. Also, I got some videos about the delay settings. So, yeah. They are differing, but here I would like to show you the amp settings. So first of all, as a cap, I'm using an IR which I was creating with a tone match function in the XFX3. I was basically tone matching the newer DSP archetype Petrucci, but I was using another amp, so using the IR, but here I changed the amp model from the Atomica High to the Recto 2 Orange Vintage. And the reason for that is I like the Recto boosted with a tube screamer. I got this original amp, the real amp, and that's a kick-ass high gain tone. Also the Recto can do great crunch tones, but always the Recto has to be, needs some other tools to fit, at least for my taste. Needs a noise gate and also some EQing maybe. It has lots of lows, lots of highs, but it tends to get flubby if you don't use an overdrive in front of it. So when I'm playing the real amp, usually I stay in the orange mode, because the red modes are way too scooped for my taste. And the Recto by itself is a very scooped amp. So yeah, it makes sense that people use the scooped amp and boosting it with a mid-focus pedal like the Tube Screamer. But here I ended up with a little bit of another booster. So first of all, I'm using the EDO page usually when setting up an amp. And here you can see I didn't do that much here. In fact, I didn't do anything. It's all at noon. Set the gain quite high. Also, I raised the input trim because this guitar, the Harley Benton Fusion 3, has, well, where vintage style pickups which don't have that much output. And here you can raise the overall signal that hits the distortion stage. As you can hear, it's quite tight, and although I crank the gain, but it's tight because I'm using an input boost, and that is set here in the preamp page. For those of you who are not familiar with this unit, of course you could have put or used a drive block here in front of the amp, where you could select your beautiful pedals, but also the amp block has the ability to choose an input boost, which uses the algorithm of some of the pedals which are modeled in this unit. So here you can choose maybe from the most famous T808, but I tend to use the full tone OCD, because for me I got the best results with that. It's just, I was just trying these things out, and usually you have to think of these pedals as maybe a mid boost. At least the 808 is boosting maybe a very narrow frequency range in the mid, so maybe around 700 or 800 hertz, cutting off the highs and lows, and that results in a very saturated tone, which doesn't get flubby in the bass or too harsh in the top end. The full tone OCD is similar in my opinion, but it's boosting a little bit of a lower frequency spectrum, so maybe it's around 400 hertz. Didn't measure that out, but to me it sounds like it was pushing the lower mids a little bit. And here you can raise the overall boost level. Usually it's set to 12 dB, but I raised it a little bit more. Again, this also depends on the guitar you're using. If I would play my guitars with the EMG 81, I would have set that back to 1, I think, and also here 12 dB would be enough. So always this control here, the input boost, and also the input trim and the gain, they have to well, to fit together. So you have to play around with that. Usually I raise the gain here until it starts to get flubby, then dial it back a little bit. Then I'm applying an input boost. If it's not enough still, or I want a little bit more saturation, then I'm using the input trim. And I didn't do other things here. What is also nice is you have the ability to set the low cut frequency of the preamp. So basically the signal is cut after it leaves the preamp, which is also very nice. And also you can cut the highs. And many preamps are doing this. For example, the Angle Savage, I think. It's working. It helps you to get the very tight amps. And also, if you use it drastically here, which I do, it's maybe cutting the highs and lows here, but still you have the 350 hertz frequency and also the frequencies below that, because it comes back in the power amp section. It's just much tighter. So if you have problems with amps which are too flubby or too harsh, then you can reduce these things. This was way more important with the older versions of the XFX, in my opinion. Here the amps are all at stock settings. They are almost perfect, in my opinion. Also, you could choose another tone stack here. For example, you could use a Marshall tone stack with your rectifier to create some kind of a hybrid amp. Very nice feature. And also you can change the tone stack frequency so that it's maybe shift a little bit to the lower frequencies or to the higher frequencies. That's basically then changing the behavior of the bass, middle and treble control. And you could choose, of course, the tone stack location, which is very important. But most of the high gain amps have the tone stack control, bass, middle, and treble after the preamp. because if it was located before the preamp, then it would act like a boost or also like an EQ in front of the amp. A famous example are the Mesa Mark series amps, which have the pre-gain control, then use these bass, middle, and treble basically for boosting the amp, and then in these amps you have the 5-band graphic EQ to shape the overall sound. So back to the topic, I was just changing here or using the input boost, and what I also did is here in this EQ, I tried to, or as you can see, I used a little bit more mids here, because always I think the rectifier is still a little bit too scooped, even if it's boosted, at least for my taste. And here also these frequencies, I dial them back, but as you can see it's only about 1 dB. I can set it to 0 to show you how it sounds without that. It might be a nice sound for recording, but in my ears, especially if playing live, it would have too much of these frequencies. I tend to have a more, maybe well-rounded sound, so to speak. So this takes away a little bit of the edge of the tone, and here it pushes the mid so that you can hear maybe the pitch of the note a little bit more. And also these faders here, they go up dynamically when I am playing higher notes. So I did this by connecting a pitch follower controller here, which is reacting to higher notes. So that's what I did with the amp. As you can see here, you have some other things. Speaker impedance curve is set by default to the fitting cap. I think you can play around with that. I think here, when I made the tone capture, I used the resistive load. But as you can hear, it's way different. And takes away the characteristics of the Recto sound. So I left it at the stock settings here, and also in the other pages which I didn't show you. So that is my Recto patch, and usually I don't play the Recto very often in this unit. Not that it sounds bad, it's just a little bit too scooped for my taste. But if you were playing maybe Rammstein or some things like that, it's maybe the best thing to use. So yeah, that was Recto. And let me show you some other patches which I created. My usual standard amp model is the Atomica High. Which is like, to me it's like the polished Marshall tone. Very nice, well rounded, nothing annoying. And also here you can see I'm using the input trim quite high. The gain here is, I've just reduced the presence a little bit. And I'm using the input boost, which is also the full tone OD. And here left everything at the stock settings, and I think in the speaker section here you can see the resistive load that I used for the tone match. So maybe I can switch to the Recto maybe. So I hope you could hear the difference. Here, way more sizzle and bass frequencies. Well, way more scooped, so to speak. And I created another patch with the Marshall JVM 410. This is an amp which I also own, the real amp. As you can see here, it's set to the default 4x12 Brit 800, maybe it's the 1960 cabinet. And yeah, it sounds like this. Similar to the Atomica. And let's check out if we use the resistor floater here. And it's way more similar to the Atomica, to be honest. But with this setting here, it has a little bit more, it sounds a little bit dirtier to me. It has a little bit more tech than the Atomica. And a little bit more of these upper mids, like the, yeah, you know, maybe from the JVM 800. Also, I dialed back here the treble and mids quite a lot because it was way too much for me. The real amp is, it can be set to great sounds, but you have to be careful with the treble control on the real amp. It's very saturated, but tends to get muddy a little bit. So I think, although the amp has tons of gain, I got better results by boosting it with the Photon OD, of course, but with a little bit less level. And nothing here. So I think this amp is also very nice for lead tones. If you disable the input boost and use just the gain of the amp, you get way more of the, or nearer, closer to the JVM 800 tone, in my opinion. But of course with more gain. And finally, I would like to show you one of my favorite amps, amp models in this unit and in many other modeling units, which is the Diesel VH4. Great amp. And I like it because it has lots of lower mids and bass frequencies, but still everything is harmonic, not flubby. And I like to have these frequencies in my tone because I'm a lead player, and then you get fat lead tones. Compared to the Atomica. The Diesel doesn't have that, the Atomica doesn't have that much load. So a very fat sounding amp. Here I'm using the one with the most gain. As you can see, I didn't have to crank it. I'm boosting it again, but it's able to boost. It still sounds great. Might also work, but it's a little bit too much bass for my taste. Of course, we can dial back the depth here, maybe the bass, but then it loses a little bit of the character. So here maybe you could try out to cut the lows. It works even without the boost engaged. And here also I didn't change anything in this section and also in the other sections. Here by default the Brit TV is selected, okay. Didn't know that. Anyway, this one is maybe the amp which I like most, together with the Atomica High. And yeah, hope this helps you to get the best high gain tones out of this unit. I think I will maybe play around with some other amp models here and create some more videos of that, but that's it for today. So please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. Hope to see you soon. Goodbye.